So that's this I here, which we're going to use in the while loop. So actually, this is the while loop that you would use, or the while statement that you would use if you were planning to scrape all of the links. So let's just look at that one for a moment. So this says while I, which starts out at 35, is less than the entire length of the links. So if we go back to the links here, I guess the length of the links, well, this is not actually reflecting the actual length of the links because we have these in there as well. But anyway, there's going to be some number of links altogether. And this says, as long as I is less than the number of links, go through and do what we're going to do. Now, I modified this a little bit here, but I won't go into that right now because I only wanted to scrape one page. I don't want to scrape all of the pages. Anyway, what we need to do is remember links is the set of all the links. And here I'm going to put in, for example, 35, and that's going to give me the link, the 36th link in our list of links. And we're specifically going to get the URL part of it. And we're going to get something like, click on one of these links. I think it might be just this part here. Just like that part there. This will be here. That's what this will be. And then we have to patch it onto this to get an actual URL that we can actually, so that we can actually access all that data page. So we're going to do, this is string concatenation. This is going to be the end of the URL. This is the beginning of the URL. This is a string. This is also going to be a string because that's what find all gives us. It gives us a string. And so this is going to, we can concatenate both of these, and this is going to give us a URL. We don't need to print the URL, but if you want to see what it is, you can. And then we're going to use it, though, to get all of the data on that page. So the first page, we're going to put the URL again into a request.get. So this is the second time we're using request.get. The first time was just to get all of the links. Now we're using it to get into the second level page, or the data page. So we're getting the data here. We call it data. Remember that we can slice lists. So data.text, we already talked about this. Data.text, actually, let's just check and see what data is and what data.text is. So let's take this and try to run it, but we have to put an actual URL in there, but we'll do that. Let's put it in here. So we have to we have to get an actual URL. So let's go back to this page and get this entire URL and put that in there. Instead of this, let's put it in the actual URL. Okay, and let's see what data is. Okay, so yeah, data just gives us that, but data.text, let's see what that is. Well, it's going to tell us it's a lot, and let's just ask for the first 10 items just to see. And the first 10 items are, as we can see, let's just try it again. Data.text, let's say the first 100 items, if that is. So it's giving me the first 100 characters. So data.text is a string, but we can treat a string as a list, or we can slice it, in other words, and that's what we've done here. So, okay, so let's consider that data.text is a string. So if data.text is a string, we can use split on it, and we can split on the new lines. And what that's going to do is give me a list with each line of that huge data set as a separate element in the list. Let's take a look at that as well. Let's try this. Let's see what happens when we do this. So data.text, splitting on n, and I'm only going to take the first. So this is going, data.text.split is going to give me a list, and I want to see what the first 24 elements, maybe I won't do 24. Let's take the first 5 elements of this list. What do they look like? Okay, so it's kind of a weird, it comes out in a weird way, but it is a list. can see it ends here. And what's the first element in this list? So it starts here. We have to find a comma which is not inside the quotation marks. So I have to keep going to the end of the quotation marks, and then there's a comma here. So the first element of this list is this thing here that I've highlighted, which is a string. But inside the string there are commas. So I can actually split this later on into pieces. So let's say the second element of this list is the string. The string starts here, so I have to find the end of the string first, and then there it is. So that's the second element of this list that we're getting. Now I can split this as well on the commas. So once I get this, I can split it on the commas, and then I can focus particularly on this particular item right here. So that's the kind of thing we want to do. Okay, now let me explain. I didn't want to do a lot of scraping here, but if you want to actually get all of the data, you're going to have to scrape all of it. But what I did is I'm just going to actually scrape the first page. If you examine this code here, and you see that I set up this variable called number of pages to scrape, and I set it equal to 1. If you examine this, you'll see that I'm only going to scrape the first page. And then if you examine this, you'll see that I'm only going to consider the first 24 rows of that first page. So I'm limiting what I'm doing here, but you wouldn't want to limit like this, and you wouldn't want to limit like this. You'd want to use this instead if you wanted to scrape all of the data. Okay, so we just said that this is going to give me the first 24 lines, and I'm going to take them one at a time because this is a for something in a list. So I'll get the first element of the list, that'll be the first line, and I'll do something with it. Then I'll come back up and I'll get the second element in the list, which is the second line, and I'll do stuff to it, and I'll keep going until I get all 24. And what am I going to do to each of these lines? I'm going to split them. I said I'm going to split them on the comma. And so I'm going to split the line, this stands for the line, on a comma, and I'm going to call that info. So this is info is also going to be a list. It's going to be a list that contains the first line, and it's each element in the first line is going to be a separate element in the list. Then I'm going to access only the element with index 9, which is the one that I said we wanted, that is this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. So, and what am I going to do? I set up this to contain all of those numbers, and now I'm going to append each of them into entrance number. So every time I go through this, for each of the 24 lines, I'm going to collect one of those numbers, the 9th element or the 10th element, however you want to call it. I'm going to collect that. I'm going to append it into here. Now I'm going to do this important step, which you must do, and that is this tells the program to sleep for 2 seconds. So don't keep going through this while loop too quickly, because if you go through the while loop too quickly, you're going to hammer the website too much, and they will not appreciate it, and they will ban you from the site. So you want to be very careful about that. Generally, you should sleep at least, say, 2 seconds, maybe longer, in order to avoid putting too much pressure on the server and in order to avoid being banned. Okay, next, we're back in the while loop. We already completed the for loop. We're back in the while loop. We increment I by 1. In my case, it's going to stop because I only wanted to scrape the first page. If you use this one, you'll continue. Okay, then I printed out some results. So I print out a blank line. I print out the length of our list called entrance number is, and then I took entrance number, I got its length, I converted that to a string so that I could print it out. And then after scraping, this is the number of pages to scrape, which I set to 1. After scraping just one page, the entrance number list is, and then I'm going to actually print out the entrance number list. So let's try running this from scratch. Go back to here and just put everything in and see how it runs. the URL, and then the length of our list called entrance numbers is 24, so I got 24 of these entry numbers, and here's the list right here. Okay, so if we wanted to see again how many people came in between 3 and 7, we would take this number, which is 7 o'clock, subtract this number from it, which would give us 9 people. If I wanted to know how many people came in between 7 and 11, I would take this number, and this number, and I guess the difference is 47. So 47 people came in that time. So this is the list that we want. This has the logs of the entries, and that came from running this code. Okay, now what are we going to do with those entrance numbers? So, of course, you could choose to collect all kinds of data. I just collected the entrance numbers, and I only collected the first 24 and only from the first page. So what can I do with that? Well, I can just make a graph if I want. So the final part of our tutorial here is going to be to try and do something with this list containing the entries.